are communist parties everywhere, and communism is never to be found. Right? That's interesting question. So through the presentation, we're going to come to this theme. So 2 talks in October of 2018, Soraya asked me to give a talk based on my previous experience, but she asked me to put some spin would have some religious theme in it. So what I decided to do, and which fascinated me for a long time, is that we frequently look at Soviet Union and a socialist country as, for example, just like us, minus certain things, minus religion. So that talk was about what the society might look like minus the religion. Because everything we in the Western civilization know today about right and wrong ultimately comes down to 10 commandments. So how the country would function which does not recognize, Bible doesn't recognize religion of any kind, and therefore doesn't recognize 10 commandments. So it is not a society which is just like us, minus religion. It's a society which built on a fundamentally different set of values. And that talk was about taking 10 commandments and go point by point, one by one, draw the parallels how those values are interpreted in a religion-less society. All right? Then in December of 2020, I think it was in December, that was another story which fascinated me a lot. When people frequently, and even quite sophisticated people, hear things about advantages of the socialism, specifically the stuff on the socialism is free. So that talk was about misspelling the myth of free apartments, free education, free medicine. We took each point one by one and went through and had a deep dive into why none of it is free and why it's all myths, right? So today, I decided to do a slightly different talk, but also having one common theme. Specifically, just socialism, the road to hell paved with good intentions. That's a title of today's talk. And Sarai saw that slide, and she asked me, Ilya, why there is a question mark at the end? And I said, I'm not going to tell you. You have to wait until the, you have to wait until the talk.
That's right.
Right. Well, the question mark, what's now is your answer, sorry. The question, and this is a topic which I think a lot, and I just want to share it with my fellow Americans because it's a very, very, very important topic, and much misinterpreted, much misunderstood. The question mark is actually not the question of is the socialism is road to hell. That's not the question. It's absolutely is a statement. It is a road to hell. The question is, are there any good intentions? So my thesis is there is no good intention. The system was developed and built exactly per design. The socialism in Soviet Union couldn't turn out in any other way than it did. It wasn't misinterpreted. It was not misunderstood. It's a logical conclusion of what happened in 1917. Okay, so let's go. You hear that, oh, socialism is a utopia. It's just great. How I understand utopia, it's a great idea. It's just not implemented correctly. Well, let's take a look. What's the definition of utopia? And that's why I'm so much against using the word utopia. It's a place of ideal perfection, especially in laws, government, and social conditions. So let's take Marxism, and it's at its own words, and judge, is it a system, is it an idea of which is a perfection in laws, government, and social conditions? So is communism utopia? If we Google in Wikipedia, what we're going to find is a definition of communism, which ends with the absence, the ideas of common ownership of the means of production, technical term, and the absence of social classes, money, and the state. So let's, in this presentation, review what absence of social classes, money, and the state actually means. How often you guys seen this picture? Have anyone seen that picture before? Right? That's a picture. It's basically saying, well, you know what? It's equality of outcome. We're just going to create a little opportunity for downtrodden and just even things up and give help for someone. And it's a great picture. It's very hard to argue. If you didn't bring a weapon with you, it's very hard to argue against this. What's wrong with that picture, right? So people under the socialism, actually, when we think of equality, when we think of classes, we more than anything, we first think about difference in means. Well, and under socialism, things actually don't work like that. Actually, under socialism, people are not really differentiated by means. In our Western mind, the means access. So if I have means, I can go and on a free market purchase anything I want. I have access by definition to things because I have means. In the Soviet Union, things do not work like this. Under socialism, it's very different. Plus, people are not differentiated by their assets. For the most part, people are pretty much making about the same amount in salary, 95% of the population, more or less. So people under socialism are very differentiated by their assets, but in a socialist country, you have right to free medicine, but the education in a socialist country is free, but. So we hear a lot from our media about the growing wealth gap. The gap between top 1% and bottom 20, right? The growing wealth gap. And you can even hear that it's the worst problem which faces America today is growing wealth gap. Well, from my perspective, someone who grew up in a socialist country, that is the meaningless propaganda nonsense. It's nonsense in its face value, but it specifically when you apply it to a socialist society. So as much as I resent Mark Zuckerberg, the fact that he is a billionaire has no bearing on me whatsoever. I have to admit that with all his billions of dollars, he can only eat that much better than I can. He can only dress that much better than I can. He can live in that much better setting that I live in Hockessin here. He can travel that much better than I can. I have to admit that most of his money actually tied up in the economy that employs people, including those bottom 20%. In the Soviet Union, under socialism, things are very, very different. It's not your asset that determines what your statue. your well-being, your quality of life. It's your access to goods and services. And that's where the true division is between different classes in the Soviet Union. So what are the classes in a classless society? Well, let me tell you what are the classes. Heads and shoulders above everyone else, and we are talking above 90% of the population, are three classes, to keep things simple. Number one, party nomenclature, what we would call in America a professional politicians, right? People who have access to special distribution sites where they are supplied with everything, practically for free. So it's not their assets there differentiate them.
10 minutes.
Kidding me. It's not their classes, but the access to this services. I read recently a very interesting interview from a reporter who spoke to someone back in the 70s, to one of the high-level party functionary. And he said, you are 69 years old. One more year, one less year, who cares? Why are you holding to this chair so tight? And his response was, 1 year? What are you talking about? If I had to hold to this chair for 1 more hour, I will hold it. Because the moment I let it go, I'm nobody. I lose my apartment, I lose my summer house, I lose my car with my chauffeur, I lose access to Costco-like distribution centers, which is basically it's where all my livelihood depends on it. And most importantly, I lose the ability to pick up the phone and get my grandson to any college in the country I want. The moment I'm out of this chair, it's all gone. So that, I think, is one of the most interesting and misunderstood parts of the socialism, how the wealth is distributed and where the real power lies, right? I highly recommend, because I'm constrained, I highly recommend this book, Class, How Russians Really Live, by David Willis. It was written by someone who lived in the Soviet Union on its tail and years. He wrote the book in 1985. Another interesting thing around the class, about the classes. Classes in a classless society. The whole premise of the society was to eliminate classes. I can tell you a short personal story. My father had some kind of dispute, local dispute with a neighbor over a parking spot. If you have a local dispute with a neighbor, the neighbor could bring arguments, well, I was there first. I'm older than you, therefore I'm entitled to this spot. Or I live closer to, I'm entitled to this spot. No, that's not the argument he brought to my father. Before anything else, he looked at him and said, do you know who am I? It is very, very typical, and we would encounter very typically in the old Soviet system. And something we had, we talked in one of the previous talk, and I just want to also emphasize something very, very important. In the Soviet Union, under socialism, you have right to free services, right to free apartment, right to free education, right to free medicine. To have right to free services is not equal to have a free services. And it's very, very important to stress. Okay? So the lesson number one of this talk is the true equality of outcome can be accomplished only in misery, not in prosperity. Okay, so next time someone show you a picture like this and you don't have a rebuttal, you can say, no, my friend, this is how it's look in theory. This is how it looks in practice. Abolition of money. Absence of money assumes that all your needs will be satisfied by the state. Sounds like a great idea, right? But the question is, who decides what these needs are? And that's when it becomes really interesting. Let's take a look what Friedrich Engels said it in The Principle of Communism, Communist Manifesto. I like that how they describe a new person, and the last sentence says, however, with all their diversity and breadth, they will be free from excess, whims, expressing the healthy, reasonable needs of comprehensively developed humanist person. All right, so what's life without excesses and whims might look like? Well, that's in the Soviet Union where I lived, you were entitled to 97 square feet per person in the apartment, right? We had state planning where the government decided what to produce and how many. That would be the typical store in a time when I lived there. Government decided what is the first necessity minimum is. Government guarantees you, yeah, we're gonna have salt, we're gonna have soap, we're gonna have matches. Not much else by that point. So when the government wants to provide you something for free, it's good to ask questions. Cashless society is road to slavery. Why? Because if you think about what are the parallels with society which has no money, it's a society which is runs a slavery. Slaves don't need to be paid and then collect the taxes from them. It's too much hassle. Why not just give them what they need? Cashless society is an instrument of control. In Soviet Union, it was a group of people who were dissidents, who wanted to leave the country or stood in the opposition to the government. In cashless society, you completely run these people off the road. They have no means to support themselves. That's why when you go to, in the 80s, you could go to a cemetery and see these people who dig graves in at night shift. Most of them have high education. Why? Because this is the only job they could find after they chose to leave the country. Government said, no, you cannot leave the country, but yet you still cannot have means to support yourself and your family. So you have to go and find alternatives. And that was one of them. And that's another interesting point. You can get rid of the money as a society physically. You never can get rid of the money economically. Because in a society of perpetual shortage, the goods becomes the money. In a society in the Soviet Union, especially in the later years where things were getting inflated year after year after year, people prefer not to deal with paper money to begin with. That's why you could buy a car in the old Soviet Union for X amount of money and 10 years later sell it for exactly the same amount. Because cars hold values, but money do not. So, lesson number 2 from this lecture. When the state satisfies your needs for free, it will also always determine what those needs are. Abolition of state. Karl Marx said the existence of the state is inseparable from existence of slavery. He saw the state only as instrument of oppression. He's actually silent. Marx actually silent to exactly what to transition, how to transition to stateless society and how it's going to happen and when. Who shed some light on on his theory is actually Lenin in a work, State and Revolution, which he wrote in 1917. So how Lenin wanted to transition to that beautiful stateless society? Well, through the dictatorship of the proletariat. How we define the dictatorship of the proletariat? Domination of the proletariat over bourgeoisie, not limited by law and supported by violence, enjoying the sympathy and support of the working and exploited masses. Okay, sorry, I have to move on, yeah? So the state actually was, the means were very quite ruthless, starting from the beginning. Immediately after the revolution, let's look at at least at the first item. What was solidified in the first constitution of the Russian Federation? Who cannot elect and cannot be elected? Persons who employ for profit, person living on unearned income, private traders, monks, ministers of churches and religious cults. That would probably disqualify every single person in this room. It's disqualified only 30% of the population in 1918 in Russia, right? You have to unfortunately skip over the rest, other bullet points. And the lesson number 3 from that lecture. When someone calls to fundamentally transform a free and democratic state, the fundamentally transformed state will neither be free or democratic. Okay, I have a couple of slides at the answer, okay, which I want to put in a summary. And what we learned today on abolition of classes. Any attempt to engineer social justice will inevitably lead to more injustice. If the social justice was just, it wouldn't need to be called social. On abolition of money, any attempt to abolish free markets in exchange for free stuff is nothing more than a move towards slavery. On abolition of state, anyone who tells you they want to destroy law and order in the name of X wants to create a state where they will be at the top and you at the bottom. I want to show you one thing, guys. I'm sure probably almost no one of you knew that, and you'll find it very interesting. Okay, this is a coat of arms of the Soviet Union, right? How many of you saw it before? You saw it on the coins and the pictures, right? Take a look at the center. What does it have in the middle? It has a globe. Why all the countries there colored in the same color? What color is that? What does it mean to you? The idea of globalism is 100 years old idea. The idea of one world with one government, cashless and borderless, it's not a new idea out of Davos. It's 100 years old idea dreamed of Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels.